Welcome, everyone. We have an exciting webinar today of only very short 30 minutes, so we're going to get started and get right into it. And for those of you that don't know, you have signed on to a webinar about empowering diversity with a conversation with our Paralympian Ellie Cole. For those of you that can't see her, let me know. But before we get started, I just want to do a quick acknowledgement to country. So MCI acknowledges that the lands and waters of the country we meet on today have been in the care of traditional custodians for thousands of years. We pay respect to the elders of local people, past and present, and to emerging leaders. And MCI acknowledges and extends respect to people from all the cultures and diverse identities who walk on this country. As I mentioned before, I'm on Gadigal land today, and I think Ellie is as well, but she can let us know. She can pop into chat or let us know where she is. For those of you that want to let us know which land you're on, please also pop that into chat. It would be greatly appreciated. So for those of you that don't know me, and you won't need to know me that much because I'm not doing much of the talking today, I'm Jenna, I'm the CEO of MCI, and we are so excited to have Ellie Cole with us. And before we get started, for those of you that don't know who MCI is, I'm not going to read this all to you. Many of you are fantastic clients, and some of you we've worked with in the past, so welcome back. But essentially, we have been around for over 20 years. We've won 35 awards, and we work very closely across Australia with private companies, public companies, and government, providing all sorts of training and education. We are a proud member of APM, and that is how we get to Ellie Cole, who is a fantastic ambassador of APM. And so there's a variety of different programs and companies that work closely with MCI in partnership with us in servicing our customers. So if you're interested in talking to us about any of these offerings, please reach out. But what I'm going to do now is start the conversation with Ellie. What I'm also going to ask you guys to do is, as we're talking, if you have any questions for Ellie, pop them into chat. Vanessa's going to be coordinating those for us. And at the end of our conversation, she's more than happy to answer any of your questions. And she'll often say there's no such thing as a stupid question. So please don't be shy. Ask her, something broad, something specific, and she's happy to answer those. So let's kick off. Ellie, welcome.
Thanks, Jenna. It's great to be here. I'm not on Darrigan. I'm on Darrigan Ku-ring-gai land, by the way. I'm not on Gadigal land. I can assure you it's just as expensive out this way.
Fair enough. Ellie, I've heard your inspiring story through APM because, as I mentioned, you're one of our incredible ambassadors. But can you just, for the audience, share a bit about your story and tell them what they're going to be listening to today?
Sure. So now I understand that probably not everyone on the call is going to be sports mad. In fact, I'm not even that sports mad as a retired athlete. But those of you that do really enjoy sport, you may know me from my days as a para-athlete. So I was on the Australian swim team for 16 years and I retired last year, which has been a really great transition into the employment space. But I suppose in context to my story, I was actually born able-bodied and then diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer called a neurosarcoma when I was just 2. And I think I don't really have any memories of my cancer diagnosis or my treatment, but I think the thing that stands out to me now that I've learnt my story through my parents is that back in those days when I was going through my treatment, my parents were really scared because at the time in the early 1990s, people with disabilities weren't really actually seen out in our communities or in our media. And my parents didn't know anybody that had a disability. So they were, I think, more terrified that I would grow up without any opportunities knocking on my door. But they kind of learned over time that they were able to provide me with the same opportunities as my twin sister. And some of the activities, I suppose, that I did growing up needed some specialized equipment or modifications. But anyway, I ended up turning to swimming and took to that like a duck to water. And funnily enough, that was actually a sport that didn't really need any modifications as a leg amputee. But yeah, I spent 16 years on the Australian swim team, 4 Paralympic Games, 3 Commonwealth Games, I think 5 World Championships. And I won a lot of medals and broke a few world records over those years. I think that'll happen if you stay in a sport long enough, to be honest. But, I think seeing the way that the Paralympic movement changed over my time as an athlete, and to see, people with a disability valued so much in our sporting landscape now. I think that was probably the real gold medal at the end of my career. It was amazing to see.
Thank you for sharing that. And so just reflecting on your earlier years, so when you were navigating through school or university and just everyday life, things like going to the supermarket, how did you feel adjusting to this new world? And do you have any memories or stories to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think, acquiring a disability certainly takes some form of adjustment. I was very young when I acquired mine. I was only 3 years old. And so I think the first adjustment that I needed to make was how to learn to walk all over again on a leg that was made of, titanium and God knows what else it was made out of at that time. But, I was very fortunate to have a really supportive family, and my parents never wrapped me in cotton wool, and I was quite an adventurous child with my twin sister. Like, they would just let us, we had this reserve kind of near our house, and my parents would just let us go off for hours and explore that. And I suppose through sport as well, they gave me all of the same opportunities as well. So I think I was quite naive when I was young, in knowing that I actually was different, because I never knew that I actually was. And it wasn't until I became older that I was told that I was different, and it was usually by other people. And then I kind of slowly began to learn, as I'm sure a lot of people with disabilities learn, that I was going to be segregated for my whole life. And it was usually going to be by the low expectations of other people. And I learnt that more and more as I've become older. And that was really challenging for me when I was younger. And it was probably actually a big driving force behind why I became an athlete, because everyone always had such low expectations on what my abilities were. And so I kind of went against the status quo of playing sport as a person with a disability. So it was a really great way for me to challenge myself, and to intentionally kind of alter what the status quo was of, the Olympic motto of being faster, higher, stronger. I tried to achieve that anyway. So, that was kind of like what my experience was like when I was younger. And when you talk about, going to university or going to the supermarket, I've got a lot of interesting stories about that, just generally walking around my communities, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, more so, people would stop me in the street and say, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going to university. And they would say, wow, it's so wonderful that you're getting an education and you're outside and experiencing these things. And I knew that they were simply saying those things because I was a person walking around with a disability. And I had an understanding when those things were said to me, that it was purely a misunderstanding from their part. And they obviously haven't had the education on what people with a disability can actually achieve. And it had nothing really to do with me personally. So I certainly had a big understanding of that. And it doesn't happen so much anymore. But even last year, I had a comment at the supermarket about how wonderful it was to see someone like me out and doing my supermarketing. But more so, I think if you think about navigating the world, it's the young kids that give me a lot of promise, because 10 years ago, they would be really curious and inquisitive about my prosthetic and ask their parents questions, and their parents would always hush them because they were so afraid of causing offense. And now in 2023, a lot of parents are now approaching me with their children saying, my child is interested in your prosthetic. Do you mind teaching them about, why you have it and what it means for you in terms of being able to access places? And it's a completely different conversation now with kids. So I have a lot of, I think I have a lot of confidence in our generation that are coming through in terms of how diverse they're going to be.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And just going back to your incredible Paralympic experience and records and medals. So you were in 4 Paralympic Games representing Australia. Can you share some insights for the audience regarding your experience within the athletes' village, and all the diverse spectrum of disabilities? I'm a proud watcher of the Paralympics on TV. And so I know, there's different categories. And what was your experience with those very diverse spectrum of disabilities you encountered?
Sure. Well, whilst I was waiting for the meeting to start, I did see Michael Dobby Bridges make a comment. So I do know that we have a fellow Paralympian on the call, and it is what happens in the village stays in the village. But I can certainly share a little bit of context with you, because it's a pretty amazing place. You know, you think about not many people actually sit and think about what a Paralympic village is. So it's of course going to be probably the most accessible place that you'll ever see in the whole world. It's like a Narnia for people with disabilities. Like, you step into this wardrobe and you come into the other side and you see this really accessible place that's so amazing. And at the same time, it's an environment that has the highest rate of disability per capita, I suppose, if you think of the village like Vatican City in terms of it's its own city in a way. And so it's pretty amazing to step into that for the first time, particularly if you're young. Actually, probably even more so if you're older, because you have never experienced anything like this before. But if you think, you know, every single room's accessible, you've got tactile flooring in there, you know, menus that have braille, some of them, you know, even speak to you with audio. But then it's an environment, I think, that's made even more impressive by the athletes themselves that are really in there, because I think in a Paralympic village, like, it literally anything goes. You see so many cool prosthetics. You see the way that people in particular are able to adapt to any circumstance that's really been thrown at them. Like, I will never forget seeing one of the Chinese swimmers. He had no arms and he was eating noodles with a chopstick with his foot. And then on the other foot, he was touch typing on his laptop. And then, you know, usually other things you'll see in a Paralympic village are like a conga line of athletes that have a vision impairment. So you'll see one athlete holding the shoulder of the person that's in front of them. So it's like quite literally that saying of the blind leading the blind. It's like that actually happens in the Paralympic village. Another cool thing that I've seen in there is we have the second tallest man in the world as an athlete. He plays sitting volleyball for Iran. And so I really encourage you to look that up on Google, because he's almost 2.5 meters tall, and he sits in front of the net when he plays, and Iran win every single match because of him.
Like a human wall.
Yeah, he actually can reach over the net. He's so tall. So it's an amazing environment where it's so accessible and there's so much innovation in there. And for a person with a disability, it's so welcoming, I think, because so many of the athletes have an experience in their home countries, particularly countries that aren't developed, of living very segregated lives. And it's their one chance to experience what it feels like to belong, I suppose. And it's amazing just to sit and people watch. If you're a people watcher, you'll love the Paralympic Village.
Thank you for sharing that. So just switching gear a little bit, because most of our audience here are in the people and culture and HR world. So you've been working tirelessly to promote inclusivity within workplaces, really, you know, from my experience, seeing you highlighting the importance of hiring people with disabilities into our teams. Why do you think companies should be so focused on diversity hiring? Where's the benefit?
I think it's something that more and more people are exploring. But, you know, now that I've left sport and have seen the amazing things that we've been able to achieve in inclusion in such a short period of time in sport, you know, and now that I'm heading into the employment space, I'm seeing a lot of the same barriers that I used to face in the employment space when I was a young athlete. And so it's kind of like I've seen, you know, where sport has been and how far it's come, but I'm kind of seeing the employment spaces back, you know, 15, 20 years ago from when I was a young athlete. And I know that in 2023, we shouldn't have so many barriers for people with disabilities, not only in everyday life, but also in the employment space. But I think one thing that's really promising for me is that I have seen what's possible. I've seen the way that the status quo has completely changed sport, and I know it's possible in the workplace. So this is why I'm really passionate about that space. From my experience working with APM as their ambassador, even just last week, you know, I was able to meet a lot of the job seekers who have been placed in work, so people with a disability. And all of these people, they've developed like and I've seen it with anyone that has a disability in Australia, they develop this like off the charts resilience, and they're able to navigate things really well. They're able to adapt really well. They're able to solve problems. And these are all things that they've just learned throughout their life experiences of having a disability. And these are the attributes that companies are looking for all the time. And so, yeah, why should you be so focused on diversity hiring? I think a lot of companies are approaching it with an intention of meeting a quota at the moment. I'm seeing that a lot, or also feeling like they need to fulfill a social responsibility. And sure, those things are great if that's certainly going to be the catalyst to employing someone with a disability. But I think we can, well, you'll learn that we can also unlock this huge wealth of benefits that not only enhance workplaces, of course, but they also contribute to building a more equitable society as well. And I think we've seen how an equitable society has been built through sport, and that can be driven even more so through the workplace, because it means that people with a disability don't have to become Paralympians to be seen. I think one thing that is really frustrating for a person with a disability is that on the streets in our everyday community, everyone just assumes that they're going to want to become a Paralympian. Not many people actually want to play sport. So workplace is a really wonderful way for us to be able to build a more equitable society without that person feeling like they are pushed into a corner and have to become a para-athlete in the first place. And when we hire with people with disabilities, it also makes that really powerful statement about the kind of society that we do want to build, because it sends a very clear message that every single individual, regardless of whether they have a disability or not, deserves an equal opportunity and their chance to be able to contribute to something meaningfully, which is, I think, what everybody is looking for. And if we actually do look at the benefits of hiring someone with a disability, on average, I've learned through my role as an APM ambassador, teams are going to be 35% more productive because they're able to adapt to change better. They are going to be more resilient, the attributes that I spoke to before. You'll also see an improvement in team collaboration, like quite a significant improvement, over 40% in fact, because that person or that team will be in an environment where perspectives are really respected, like different perspectives and different voices of everyone's really expected. And the thing that really blows my mind about hiring, sorry, I'm getting really passionate about this.
No, I love it. Keep going.
About hiring someone with a disability is that there is going to be, you'll see on average, an 83% improvement on innovation, just because of those different perspectives that are welcome within that environment. So you'll see that your team will have an ability to innovate with an 83% improvement. And I think with how quickly the world is developing and changing at the moment, like that is gold right there. And I love gold because I love gold medals. So, but it's all of these things that you'll see, higher staff retention, because all of the employees are going to have more job satisfaction. In fact, inclusive teams, their employees are 4 times more likely to stay in that organization, because it's inclusive organizations usually feel more accepted, heard, and respected, and they're happier at work as well. And so that goes for everybody. It's not just that person with a disability, it's your whole team. And because of this, you'll also see, I think, lower absenteeism. And of course, I think, importantly, your company will also experience better brand reputation. I think seeing Dylan Olcott and his Shift 20 initiative, and seeing so many brands being able to visibly put people with a disability on our television screens, that was amazing. And I know that all of those brands, everyone's talking about them and their reputation, and it's amazing to see that. So obviously those companies are going to have a bit more brand loyalty and more opportunity to win new business than they didn't have before. So yeah, I could keep going on and on and on, but I absolutely love talking about how we can make this space better, because I think one of the biggest barriers that we face in the employment community, that I've seen over the last year or 2 years since I've been working with APM, is this huge fear of the unknown. And it's not just in the employment community, actually, it's in our wider community, because of course, as I mentioned in the Paralympic Village, disability sits on quite a spectrum, and Australians have this huge fear of offending others. And so in my opinion, we actually unintentionally, no one wants to discriminate against people with disabilities. but we are unintentionally doing this because we have this huge fear of something that is so unknown to us. And we're so afraid of doing something wrong. We're so afraid of saying something wrong. And as humans, when we're really scared of something, we tend to just completely avoid it altogether. And so if we look at the employment rates of people with disability, it's only sitting at 48%, whereas people without a disability is actually sitting at 80%. And I personally believe that one of the biggest barriers to this is, yes, accessibility is a huge factor, but even more so, it's our culture. It's a lack of understanding of disability. And I think that really stems from fear about saying or doing the wrong thing. So people aren't educating themselves. So employers are just avoiding it altogether. And so it's kind of like this cycle that's just going round and round. And that's why the employment rates haven't improved for such a long time, in my opinion. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, I love it. Do not apologize. Absolutely love it. I mean, I think you've sold everyone in the audience. They wouldn't have signed up otherwise, but I think your stats and your passion were super exciting and energizing. So what are things that the listeners can do straight after this call? So things that they can do to empower their team members to be more inclusive within their workplace, but also towards the customers that they support, whether that's in a call center or a service center or a retail environment. What are some of those practical things they can do today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as workplaces, when you think about people with disability, you think about the people who are within your own workforce or within your own work teams. But of course, your customers are also going to have disability as well. We all know that 1 in 5 Australians have a disability. So you're going to know someone that has one, whether that's someone in your workplace, whether it's a family or a friend, you yourself, or as well as your customers. You're going to face disability. It's just something that we can never, ever not face. It's always going to be there. And so I mentioned before, about the lack of understanding and how I think that's one of probably the biggest barriers that we face in our communities. And it's been interesting because over my lifetime as a person with a disability, I'm 32 in a couple of weeks. So I've lived most of my life with a disability. I've seen environments and I've seen workplaces as well becoming more and more accessible. People with disabilities, obviously I had a really great platform through my sport, but every person with a disability now has a great platform through social media. And so social media has been amazing in making a more diverse Australia, I think, because everyone has their own voice to be able to, educate others out there. So naturally, we are becoming more and more exposed to disability. And these barriers are slowly starting to dismantle. But if you do want to do something practical yourselves, I think just something that you can actually do right now is just challenge your own way of thinking, because we grow up with this idea of what normal is. And if I ask you, Jenna, what is normal? Everyone's going to have a different answer and everyone's going to have a different answer anyway. So I think challenging what you think is the norm, and why you think that way, what have you been exposed to that's made you think this way? Because in the early 2000s, when I began swimming, no young child would have ever been able to correlate the word athlete with a disability or athlete with a champion, disability with a champion. Now in 2023, I'm not even kidding, able-bodied kids are asking me how they can become Paralympians when they're older, because they are being able to correlate those two things. And they think it's awesome and they want to do it themselves. But it's amazing what those kids have been exposed to versus what the ones when I grew up were exposed to, or what the people. So exposure is a huge thing. And, challenging what the norm is completely changes the world. And I've seen that through sport. So that goes to say, I think the more that you educate yourself on different perspectives, which is why diversity is so important, the more likely that you'll be able to challenge your own thinking. So challenging your thinking is hugely important, but you're only able to do that if you expose yourself to as many different perspectives as possible. And so that goes to say, I think that educating yourself on these different perspectives is really important. So educate as much as you can. And I know thank you, Jenna, in the last few months, you've given me some amazing access to some of the e-learning courses, and I did the Serving Customers with a Disability course. And I've my whole life is disability. I expose myself to as much disability as I can. And even I was sitting there thinking, how do I best service this customer? How do I best respect their needs and respect the individual at the same time? And like, I was learning so much. So it was amazing to be able to do that. Even I don't know it all, even though I like to think that I do, but I know that I don't. And it's really important that we're always educating ourselves on those different perspectives.
Thank you so much for that, Ellie. So what I'm going to do now is open up for questions that the audience have asked. There's a couple already in there, but if anyone else has questions, please keep putting them through. We're going to go right to the 12:30 mark. So first question comes from Isla. Would love to hear from you, Ellie, if you think Australia's attitude to inclusivity is improving.
That's a great question, and thank you, Isla, for your question. I like to think that it is. I've got a very different perspective on attitude to inclusivity, though, because I've seen, the leaps and bounds that we've been able to make in sport. But I think that's something that really shocked me when I stepped away from my sport bubble and actually stepped out into the real world, is I saw that there was still so much unintentional discrimination or intentional discrimination out there. And if I look at the employment statistics that I showed you before, those haven't really changed for quite a long time. And so I do think that our openness to inclusion is improving, but I think that there's the actual steps that we've made to change those. I think it's improving, but very, very slowly. So it's amazing to see everyone on the call here today, because everyone here is obviously making a commitment to open themselves to those different perspectives. And you guys are going to be the ones that, push that forward in terms of inclusion improving in Australia. So I think it is. But I've certainly lived a very unique lifestyle. I'm actually probably not the best person to ask that.
It's your opinion, and that's all that matters today. I am going to take one more question. There's quite a few still in chat, and hopefully we'll be able to get to some of them. Actually, two questions. Somebody just put in a fabulous one. So first one comes from Annalise. I'll read both of them to you so you can get to them. So how do you help team leaders overcome fear of having someone with a disability in their team, the fear that they will do or say something wrong? And then the other question comes from Kirsty. How can we encourage people with disabilities to apply to our jobs that we post?
Okay, so for the first question, I get asked this question all the time because so many people are very worried about offending. In fact, I have my own experience with this, with speaking to someone from an Indigenous background, where I was stumbling all over my words, and I was like, gosh, this is how people must feel talking about disability to me. And so I think the most important thing about talking to someone with a disability is to always show them that you have really good intentions with your questions. Asking questions is really important. Don't just assume that they have this ability or this ability. Ask them, what can I assist you with? Is there anything that I can do for you? Never just do it for them kind of thing, because, people with disabilities have usually lived with them for quite a long time. They're able to manage them very well, and they're able to talk about what they can and can't do to somebody else. So all that you need to ask is, how can I help you, or what can I do to assist you in this workplace? And if you show them that you have really good intentions, and you say, look, I'm not sure if this is an insensitive question, but they'll tell you, that's not insensitive, or I'm comfortable for you to keep asking questions, and they'll open themselves up to you usually. So as long as you've got good intentions, and even if you are nervous about it, say it, and they'll really find that, endearing, and they'll want to probably tell you as much as they can to help both people feel comfortable, I think. And the second part of the question, what was that? Inclusive.
How can we encourage people with disabilities to apply to the jobs that we post?
Oh, this is another great one. So I think I've read a lot of job adverts since I've retired, just out of curiosity. And most people don't actually write, we're an inclusive practice, we're able to make modifications. Obviously, speaking to APM is a huge step, because they're going to be able to assist you whether you need workplace modifications. They'll also be able to assist you with how to write your job adverts to attract as many people with disabilities as you can. But if your job advert is really accessible, if you can, I think you can change settings within job adverts to make the text more accessible. Jenny, you might have a bit more information on that, because you kind of work in that area, but being a CEO and all. But yeah, that's really, really important. and being really open that, you know, this is an accessible workplace. We're really interested in hiring people with disabilities and willing to work with you to make something work. And we can also offer flexible hours or whatever if that's needed. But yeah, certainly making that intention as well known as you can.
Excellent. Ellie, we are right on the half-hour mark. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone, thank you for attending. I apologize if we didn't get to all of your questions. If you have any questions that you urgently need answered, please send them through. You'll also hear from our team. Michael W. Bridges has posted in chat about what APM can do to help you. As Ellie mentioned, she's done one of our e-learning programs, which I think is fantastic. So if you want to hear more about that and how you can support your teams in looking after people with disability within their teams or serving customers with disability, reach out to us. Thank you so much for everyone for giving us your time. Thank you, Ellie, for joining us, and have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenna.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for coming.